Welcome to the show. Geek Insider presents Into the Geekverse, the place to get an inside look at movies, comics, games, tech, and everything exciting going on in the Geekverse. Join Matthew Harris and David King as they take a deeper look at the good, the bad, and the downright terrible things our Geekverse has to offer. With live chat, geek news, special guests, and lots more. So sit back, relax, and join us for a peek into the Geekverse.
Hey everyone, it's a known fact that when brushing, most people miss up to 40% of their teeth. But thankfully, the Hum by Colgate has you covered. Hum by Colgate is a smart toothbrush and app combination that will give you and the kids sparkling smiles and more of them. Colgate is the official sponsor of Into the Geekverse, and you can get into the rhythm of better brushing by heading over to shop.colgate.com. As an official insider, you can use discount code GEEK20 and get 20% off the Hum by Colgate. That's shop.colgate.com and discount code GEEK20. Welcome, everyone. It is another Sunday, and we are into the Geekverse once more. That says episode 12 up there if you're watching on YouTube, but this is actually episode 14, part 2, with Howard Scott Warshaw, the infamous murderer, or killer, I should say, of the video game industry, or so they accuse him of. Howard, welcome to the show again. We had an hour and a half last time, and it just wasn't enough time, and so we invited you back.
It was so great last time. You couldn't keep me away. I'm really glad to be back.
Well, we definitely appreciate it, and folks, if y'all missed the last show, I'll have it in the description. We're going over Howard Scott Warshaw's book, Once Upon Atari, and I've read it. David has read most of it. And if you don't know the story, you got to get the book, because I will spoil some things, or we will spoil some things, but there will be other things that we're going to make you read the book for. And but Howard,
not only that, but other than reading the book, if you're more of an audio listener, we have some news from Howard Scott Warshaw that hopefully he'll share with you. If you're not a big reader and you rather listen, I think he's got some news that y'all like.
And just like E.T., it's going to be a Christmas deadline.
Holy mackerel! So are we doing it in 5 weeks?
I hope that would be nice if I could do that in 5 weeks, but it's I'm not going to let the schedule interfere with the quality of the product this time. So it's but I do want to have an audio version of Once Upon Atari: How I Made History by Killing an Industry. Going to have that out hopefully by Christmas season.
Great Christmas gifts.
Right. And Howard, tell everyone that for the folks that weren't here last week, what is the book about?
Well, Once Upon Atari is a memoir of mine that covers a variety of different things. A lot of people are familiar with the dig in Alamogordo, New Mexico, where they were looking for the buried ETs, the big urban legend. And that day is covered in detail. So is the entire ET project, and so is my entire career at Atari, including the entire story behind the creation and delivery of Yar's Revenge, of all the Spielberg interactions with Raiders of the Lost Ark and E.T., and Saboteur, my lost game that was found 20 years later. It's also basically everything about my life leading up to Atari and where I've been since, and the great Sohern I had, because Atari was an amazing experience. I mean, it was an unbelievable experience. And after that, where do you go? What do you do? I spent like 20 to 25 years wandering in a professional desert trying to find a second act until I finally did in psychotherapy. And now I'm an actual practicing psychotherapist in Silicon Valley. It's all in the book. And it's a fun book. You wouldn't know it till talk to me, but I'm actually a pretty amusing guy.
And guys, you heard it from him first. He gave you a little summary, but we won't spoil everything. You should definitely get the book. If you're more of an audio person, definitely get it for a wonderful Christmas present. Now, Where we were leaving off last episode, we were digging a little bit into Easter eggs and how that was getting started. I actually had a question for you. So I know a lot of people here also watch movies. There was a really big movie that came out, and it was pretty much riddled with talking about Easter eggs that was head to toe from everything.
He knows exactly which one you're talking about.
And at the very end, they mentioned that the first Easter egg was adventure. And they're trying to figure out the entire time, and it's this big revelation. And I wanted to talk to you about that. When you watched that movie, like when you saw that scene, what was going through your mind?
When I saw that movie, what was going through my mind?
Yeah.
I was thinking, why didn't they use Yar's Revenge instead of Adventure? That's what I was thinking. But no, Ernie Cline is a good friend of mine. In fact, Ernie Cline, who wrote Ready Player One, wrote the foreword to my book, Once Upon Atari. And Ernie told me, the reason I say it is because he told me that when he was thinking of what game to feature because of the Easter eggs that he remembered from playing it, it was either Adventure or Yar's Revenge. It was going to be one of those two games. And it turned out to be Adventure. And actually, it's the right choice. I think it's the right choice because Adventure was the game that invented the Easter egg, right? People think of the Easter egg as like metagaming. Right? It's like a little something extra that you put into a game so that players have an experience beyond just playing the game. You can look for extra stuff. And that's a great thing to do with a game. It increases the life of the game and the play experience of the game. But that's not really where Easter eggs came from. Easter eggs were not about creating more play. What Easter eggs were really about originally was being able to prove authorship. Okay. And why was that an issue? Because when you're at Atari did not ever want programmers identified. Atari did not want anyone to know who did the games. They just wanted people to think it's an Atari game and that's it. Atari made the game. So that's okay for Atari. But what we used to wonder is, okay, so let's say you go somewhere else and you're doing an interview and they say, well, what have you done? And you say, well, I did the adventure game. And so they go, well, so what? That's bull. Anybody could say they did that game. Right. How do we know you did that game? And so the idea of an Easter egg was to put something in the game that only you knew about. So at some point, if this ever came up, you could say, okay, here, show me Adventure. I will show you how I know I did the game. I will prove to you I did the game. And so you do something in the game and you maneuver to it, and then boom, in an Adventure, it says, created by Warren Robinett. Warren Robinett is the guy who made Adventure, a genre-defining, real revolutionary presentation in video gaming. And he wanted to make sure he could identify himself as the author. So he put that in because who else is going to put someone else's name in their game? Right? Right. So that's what Easter eggs were about. Easter eggs were about proving, and it was about hiding them. We had to sneak them through QA, but there was no one in QA who could read code or anything. And if you were smart enough about how you placed your Easter egg, no one would find it in testing. Mm-hmm. So what I did with yours, I did not invent Easter eggs. Yar's Revenge was a few Easter egg games down the line. What I did was I involved marketing. I turned Easter eggs from a secret code for identifying your game into a marketable enhancement to games by convincing marketing they ought to get behind us with this instead of trying to do this, we're not going to tell you who'd made the game, and come out and say, here's some extra stuff we're putting in the games, go find it, and make it an attractive part, and a little, as they say in New Orleans where I went to school, a lagniappe. A lagniappe is a little something extra that you get that you didn't expect. And so that was what I did. And then I went on to really take the Easter egg concept and blow the roof off with it. It was just because in each one of my games, I have a series of signatures. Yours is the only one that has one signature. Raiders has 2, ET has about 5, and Saboteur was a game that I finished pretty much at Atari, but didn't get released. Atari kind of crashed at that point. It got released many years later, but I didn't release it officially, so I didn't put the signature. So I never would put a signature in a game until I was basically done with the game, because I never wanted an Easter egg to cost quality in a game.
Right.
Now, a lot of people would say, well, E.T. might be a counterexample to that, but it was still the last things that I put into the game before releasing.
Now, speaking of Yar's Revenge and Easter eggs, last episode you gave us a little teaser about another Yar's Revenge. Do you have some really big ideas for maybe another Easter egg in the other Yar's Revenge?
Oh, I have a number of ideas. Yeah, I have an agreement with Atari to produce a Yar's Revenge sequel. Now, there's already, Yar's Return and Yar's Recharged, and those are not really sequels to Yar's Revenge. Those are what I would call enhancements or redux versions of Yar's Revenge, and they're cool. And I know Mike Micah, the guy who did it, or his group who worked on it, Digital Eclipse, and they're really good. They're really good developers, and I really respect their work.
But not an original Howard Scott Warshaw.
It is not an original Howard. The way you'll know a real Yar's Revenge sequel is it will have nothing to do with Yar's Revenge except in the storyline, right? And it is. And I have a fully developed design for the game that is going to be the actual Yar's Revenge sequel. I have an agreement with Atari to do it. And one of the things that's in the agreement is I get to put at least 5 Easter eggs in the game. So it's all part of the deal. I have foreseen this, and I've made sure that we're going to have room for it, because to me, part of Yar's Revenge is continuing the legacy.
Right.
There's the game, which has to be a hot twitch action, visual and audio overload. It just has to be a sensory overload experience. And there has to be enough extra things and enough signatures and enough Easter eggs to just. There's always something yet to be found in one of my Yar's games.
Now, is there a target release date yet, or is that?
Absolutely not. It's very early. I have the design completely written out. They have the design. We're shopping for developers now, and we're going to try and find a way to get it. I would shoot for next year. It's definitely not going to be this is not going to be this Christmas.
Oh, no, I didn't figure that.
No, I'm just saying, because,
right.
I could imagine people thinking, there's something magical about Christmas and Howard trying to push something out. But this particular pregnancy, it won't come to term till next year.
I got to ask, we're on the topic of Easter eggs, and tying back into the book, did you put a reverse Easter egg in the book? Because I'm thinking poor Bob. I really don't know that you got to everything in the book that you promised Bob we were going to get to. And so
that may be. When you say a reverse Easter egg, you mean the fact that the name's forward and backwards?
Well, just that you tell us something's going to be there and then it's not, and with an Easter egg, you don't tell us something's there and it is. So I was just kind of wondering.
Oh, nice. I like that. Yeah, Bob was always waiting for the next thing. I tried to come through with everything I promised to talk about, but, there's so many things I want to talk about. It's hard to get back to all of them.
Now, as you can see, I've got my Yar's Revenge shirt on here.
I like that.
One thing I wanted to bring up is I want you to tell everyone about the Yar's Revenge Museum of Modern Art moment.
Oh, yeah. One thing Atari gave to me was bucket list items. There were a number of items on my bucket list that I always wanted to take care of, and Atari gave me the chance to knock a few of those off. And one of them was I'd always wanted to be an exhibitor at a major museum. I didn't know how I would do it because I cannot paint, I cannot sculpt. Anything I draw looks like either a cow or a house. That's about it. And I just don't have representational talent. I'm an interpretive artist. Right? I'm not a creative artist. And so I didn't know how I'd do it. And then at one point in 2013, I got an email from the Museum of Modern Art saying that one of my games, Yar's Revenge, was under consideration for being in their, examples of modern art, video games as modern art examples, which would have had not Gene Shalit, but Roger Ebert spinning in his grave, right? Because I remember I wrote several articles about how when Roger Ebert would talk about how video games are not art. I always found that very offensive. But
definitely.
simply because I think it's an absurd thing to say, right? Because art, to me, there's no medium that you could say is an art or is not an art, right? Because media hosts art. Art is an expression, right? So if there's a medium, you can put something in that medium that is artworthy and that isn't artworthy, right? Not every painting is art, but some paintings are definitely art, right? I've
Very much
proven that
so.
not every sculpture is art. But any medium can host art, which to me is an expression of truth. And if you can really tell the truth in a way that people can recognize it and see it in their own lives, then to me, that's art. Art's a communication. And any medium can host it. And, even ET, ET could be considered art because everybody knows the truth of blowing a schedule.
Now, we've hit on Yar's Revenge, and then the next game, Raiders of the Lost Ark, which was the first translation from a video or a movie to video game. What I want to hear, and you touch on it a little bit in the book, but can you tell us about that whole first meeting with Spielberg?
Well, the whole first meeting with Spielberg, and that is, I think I covered that a lot in the book because that was a very important day to me. Do you mean, well, when you say the first meeting with Spielberg, you mean about the design of E.T. or when I first met Steven Spielberg?
No, when you first met Steven Spielberg.
Yeah, so that was a wacky day. That was a wacky day because what happened was immediately after Yar's Revenge, the word came up that they wanted someone to do Raiders of the Lost Ark. They wanted someone to do a movie conversion on the VCS, which no one had ever done before. And so some names were kicked around. I had just finished Yar's Revenge, so my name came up. And so it was decided that I would be the first one up. Because what you had to do was you had to go interview with Steven Spielberg. This wasn't just a game we were going to assign. Ordinarily, a game would come to engineering and the engineering managers would give out the game to whoever was available. But in this case, Steven Spielberg was going to be involved in choosing who was going to do the game. So I got to go see Steven Spielberg. So I had a 9:30 meeting in Los Angeles. I'm in San Jose. So I'm scheduled for a 9:30 meeting in Los Angeles, which means I'm up around 5, which is not my thing. And I get to the airport and I got a flight down, the first flight in the morning to LA, go through all the rush hour traffic in a taxi, make it to Warner Brothers Studios, get there. I make it at 9:25. I'm right there in time for my meeting. I have traveled hundreds of miles through the air to get here to this appointment. And the first thing I hear, I don't even see Spielberg. The first thing that happened, I come in and the receptionist looks at me and says, "Oh, Mr. Warshaw, yes, your meeting has been moved to 3:30.
It's good to know.
I said, "What?" I flew in a plane to get here. I have reservations to fly back before 3:30. Oh, no, the meeting has been moved. They've moved the meeting 6 hours later. Sorry if this is inconvenient for you. But, I'm a lemonade kind of guy. So I just looked at it. I said, "Well, can you change my flight reservations?" And they said, "Sure." And I thought, well, this is kind of cool.
And this is the
I'm
part,
asking.
And what I was just going to say, what's coming up next is the part that I really wanted the listeners to hear because I was loving this.
Yeah. So the next thing I thought is, well, I am a huge movie and TV buff. And so I said, is it okay if I just sort of cruise around the studio until the meeting? And she says, "Sure, go ahead." So I had carte blanche to cruise Warner Brothers Studios unescorted for 6 hours. And I did everything. I walked on sets. I had lunch at the commissary with a whole bunch of costumed characters. I stole things from the sets. I stole souvenirs from some of my favorite shows. Fantasy Island, boss, the plane. Fantasy Island was a very big show back then. And they would always open the thing up with them talking in front of this. They had this like flower covered little trellis.
Yeah.
Right, on the lanai. Exactly. And so I saw the set where that was, and they had all these plastic flowers. They were all plastic flowers that were on the trellis. I stole one of those flowers. I put it in my pocket. I just thought, this is so cool. And so I got to literally just cruise around, walk around. I'd hear people talking people would go by on the carts who were on the tours. And, I would actually hear people go, who's that? Is that anybody? I don't know. That's nobody. I don't know. Who is that? It must be somebody. It was just really cool. And then at the end of all that stuff, then I get to go meet Steven Spielberg and hang out with him, which ordinarily would be amazing because Spielberg is one of my heroes. I love the movies that he's done. I watched him on TV from Duel on. So like everything that he did, loved him. But it's a weird thing to meet your heroes. It's weirder still when you meet them because you're interviewing with them and they're going to sit in judgment of your work. That was strange. So I was a little nervous, but I brought a Yars Revenge with me, and he had all kinds of game consoles there. So we plugged in a Yars, we played a little Yars, and I think he liked Yars. And then we started talking. And at one point I decided, yeah, it's an interview or whatever, but I have this theory. I've always had this theory that Spielberg was an alien, that Spielberg himself was an alien. So I just said to him, I said, Steven, I have this theory that you're an alien. Would you like to hear it? And he goes, yeah, sure. I'd like to hear that. So I laid the whole thing out for him about how the aliens, aren't going to show up in a spaceship. The aliens are going to we're going to find out they're already among us. And I said, and I figured what he's doing is that they're going to culturalize the planet first. So he's making movies like Close Encounters. And this was before E.T. was out. Right. So I didn't even know about E.T. yet, but he was making movies where aliens were friendly people who engage us and it's okay and we're safe and it's not going to be a big destroy the world thing. And I said, so I figure you're the production arm of this advanced team for the aliens, and the marketing team is making sure it's seen everywhere in the world. And so I just wanted to say, great job. You're doing a great job. Really admire your work. And so that was it. And then we pretty much finished up the interview and I took off for the airport. And the next morning when I came into work, word had come back that Spielberg had decided I was going to do the Raiders of the Lost Ark game. And I'm pretty sure it was all about calling him an alien.
And I wonder, I bet you're the only one in history that has ever told him that he could be an alien, except for maybe his kids.
That could be. I've never heard anyone else tell that story. So it's
right. You've got a lot of unique stories, Howard, but one that, and I'm going to kind of go on the personal side outside of the Atari kind of things here. You told a story in the book, man, and it really resonated with me because I had kind of the same issue happen with me in school. Would you mind telling the poetry story? And could you give us the part that you left out of the book? I want to know what the hell happened, man.
The poetry story?
Yeah, the poem. When you had to write the poem and the teacher.
Oh, yeah, that's a long time. Okay. Yeah, so this was, I had to adopt a separate voice. A different voice in the book to tell this story because this story is very triggering for me.
Right, I'm sure.
But this is a true story. This was when I was in third grade. I was in second or third grade. Pretty sure it was third grade. And what happened was we had an assignment to write a poem. It was like springtime. And we had to write a poem about spring. So I wrote something about birds and bells ringing and stuff like this. And it was a little poem. And I wrote it and I thought, big deal. And then we each take turns going up and showing it to the teacher. So I went up and I showed it to the teacher. And she looked at me and she sort of got really sour. She got really, really irritated. And I'm like, what? The poem's that bad? That's what I'm thinking. And she looks at me and she says, where did you get this? And I said, I wrote it. I just wrote it. And so she's like, where did you get this? Did you see this in a magazine? I said, no, didn't you see? I was sitting at my desk. I just wrote. I could not understand what was going on. Didn't make any sense to me at all. And she's like, you didn't write this. Where did this come from? Where did you get this? I don't think I could have memorized a poem and brought it in. And how would I have known to do that in the first place? I didn't know we were writing. And I'm just totally gobsmacked at this point, right? It's like, what? what? I wrote a poem. And she just like was really disgusted with it. She was, go back to your seat. We'll talk to you later. She goes, yeah, you're not telling the truth. And I really couldn't figure it out. And I went back to my seat and I felt horrible. I felt horrible because I couldn't understand what was so bad about what I had done. And after a little while, it occurred to me, I was thinking about it and I realized, oh, it's good. It's a good poem. She thinks it's too good for me to have written. And then I thought that kind of sucks also in its own way, but I thought, oh, okay, so this is it. And the funny thing was, it's like, so as I'm getting this and I'm realizing it, and now I'm starting to think, oh, it's good. And I'm smiling, and I'm really kind of happy and I'm smiling. And she's looking at me occasionally. She's looking between papers, like she's looking at other people's papers and she's looking over at me. And I'm like smiling. And she must think I'm thinking, I pulled one over on you or something. But right. I'm realizing, oh, she thinks this is a really good poem. I could really, I may have a future as a poet. And every time I would smile, she would get more angry. She got angrier and angrier. That was a rough day in some ways, but it was very validating and very invalidating at the same time. Because it was very weird to think, oh, she thinks it's a really good poem, but because she thinks it's a good poem, she thinks I couldn't do it.
I had my poetry muse strike kind of in the same way. I had missed school one day, called a buddy of mine. I said, hey, what were our assignments? We had a couple of classes together, and he told me, and he goes, in English Lit, we've got to write a poem. And I was like, what the hell you mean we got to write a poem? And with our annual, they did a little magazine every year and it had poems. And she said, yeah, or he said, we got to all write one to submit to the magazine. And I was like, whatever. I had never written a poem in my life. But when I hung up that phone, the first stanza hit me. And the rest just fell in line. I bet within 45 minutes, the thing was done. And I had never touched another line after that. And it was a long poem. And it was totally about the Vietnam War. And this, of course, I was born, right as it ended or was ending. But and this was before the Chuck Norris movies and all of that, the stuff that was glorifying Vietnam. But anyway, it was just, I always said that's when my writing muse first came about. And so that's why I was really struck by your story when you said that and you just went and sat down and just same thing, had never written poetry and you just pumped that out. And so thanks for sharing that with the audience.
No, it's my pleasure. I'm feeling a real connection because the funny thing is when I wrote that poem, the Vietnam War was on.
Oh, gotcha.
So maybe there was another connection there. Interesting.
That made me think about that time Matthew told me a story. I believe somebody asked for an example of your work, and you were telling me you had provided it to them, and then they were like, it was something about like they're not going to hire you or something because they were like
a resume.
They're like, you plagiarized this, and you're like, huh? And then they looked it up, and it was you. They had already recognized your work before. And that's what that reminded me of.
No, yeah. That was good. No, there was a time where I was teaching a class. To, it was at a community college, but it was a class for kids. It was a class on life. It was just, they were trying to find someone who could teach like life lessons. So I was teaching this class with just a lot of interesting themes and stuff, at least I thought. And one of the kids came up to me one day, and I guess he'd been telling his parents, he says, my father would like to see your resume. So I said, okay. So then I went home that night and I just, touched up my resume and gave it to the kid the next day. And I had done this is in early 90s. So I had done a bunch of things, but I hadn't done anywhere near all the stuff I've done to date, of course. But he took it home and the next day he comes in and he goes, my dad says you didn't do all this. He says, nobody does all this stuff. And I just thought, God, what is this? And then I felt really bad for that kid. I felt really bad for that kid because I thought what I heard was his father is not capable enough to do as much stuff as I was doing and couldn't imagine that anyone could. So his father has like limited vision or limited capacity, and that's who's raising this kid. And it just made me feel a little sad. And now as a therapist, you know, that's, I'm all about maximizing people's potential and stuff like that. So even then, you know, before I ever considered becoming a therapist, it was, I really did have that empathetic, you know, impulse with the kid, or just like that poor kid, his father is really kind of lame.
And folks, if y'all are wondering about what resume that he's talking about, he is you can find that out in the book. There is a wide range. He kind of hit on it at the beginning of the show if you're listening on the podcast.
Do you mean this book?
That is the very book. And folks, I will tell you, I mentioned this on the show 2 weeks ago when Howard Scott Warshaw showed up. It's that it took me a few weeks to read it, but that's because of time. The first half of that book, I had never laughed or hadn't laughed that much at a book in a long time. There's so much to relate to, especially if you've worked in an office or you just worked with an eccentric bunch of people, which is pretty much if you ever worked in an office. And he just brings to the table or lets you share in his life of so many various aspects. It's not just about Atari. Yes, it's life at Atari, and then it's the life after Atari, but there is a lot of Howard mixed in this, and that's what I enjoyed. Howard is, you know, yeah, I'm a huge Atari fan. It was a big part. I get chills just thinking about how much of a part of my life it was growing up. But, you know, it was that personal touch. And, you know, we've gone almost 3 hours now, and really I hadn't even touched on ET, and I don't want to yet. But you were talking about being so empathetic earlier. I not only read the book, I watched Atari Game Over. And I tell you, man, both in the book and in the documentary, I'm going to do it right now. When there's a point when you tear up, I teared up. I don't want to give anything away. And so I almost did, but no, man, you know, between reading the book and then meeting you last week and then finishing the book, you just really bring the reader in. And that's one reason why I was asking you last time around, you know, do you have another book plan? I'm just happy as hell that there's a Yars sequel coming. But you know, I do, folks, if y'all want to read this book, of course you can get it, you know, at your local bookstore, but you can just go to onceuponatari.com and pick up your copy. As Howard mentioned earlier, he is now working on the audio version of it. And so you can listen to it in his nice, soothing, I don't know, is that a Californian accent? Does California have
Well,
an
originally
accent?
it was New Jersey, but by way of New Orleans, but it's definitely, after 40 years, it's definitely Californicated.
Now, I'm sorry, David, you were going to ask something a minute ago and I stepped on you.
Oh, I was just going to say, speaking of Once Upon Atari, and then we were just kind of talking about your therapy, there was an early point in the book and an early point in your career with Atari where they sat down and they asked you, would you want to work on coin-op or would you want to work on console, I believe? How, and I go, that's from the book and then from therapy. How did you feel being in a job where they're like, what would you like to do? Because nowadays, or at least jobs that I've had, it's like, here's your job responsibility. Do what I tell you to do, how I tell you to do it. I imagine that must be totally different experience.
It was, and it was pretty awesome. What I realized is that's what happens when companies are growing, when companies are in a massive growth spurt. What can happen is they have a lot of jobs to fill and they're interviewing people, and sometimes people show up who are capable of multiple possibilities. And when that happens, you know, how do you place them? What do you do? And Atari's, you know, they thought, well, what do you want to do? It was interesting because I really wasn't expecting that either. And so, I mean, I interviewed with them just to do something, and it was either going to be like home computer or VCS. And I just said to them, I said, look, I said, just put me on the dirtiest, ugliest system you have. Because one thing I hate is going backwards in technology. So I said, just put me on the lowest level, dirtiest, ugliest tech you have. Let me start there, and then I'll be happy. You know, and that was the VCS. The VCS was the most primitive machine they had at the time.
And that's, you know, beautiful or very forward thinking, wanting to start at the bottom. And because then the only way to go is up. But, it can be argued, in my opinion, that the home video game systems killed the coin ops. And in essence, you just don't see the arcades like you used to back in the 70s and 80s. You'll find them, at the bowling alley or the movie theater. But, you've pointed out in the book, you pointed out a lot more, both good and bad, that Atari and video games themselves have created. Off the top of your head, do you mind sharing a couple of those insights?
Well, not at all. I mean, video games, definitely have changed the world in some very profound ways. But what have they really done? Well, one thing they've done is they've contributed tremendous amount of technology, right? Because it used to be that the only way new tech came about was through massive government financing and endowments to universities or Defense Department, which is really where most technology came from, right? Is there would be government investments in defense technology contractors, and that's where lasers and jets and bombs and a lot of that stuff, a lot of the technology for those things, that's where that came from. Once video games really started up, suddenly a lot of new technological developments were coming out of the video game oven, essentially, and not other places like that. If you think about what has video games brought, well, most digital movie effects were work that was perfected in the video game industry. Virtual reality, augmented reality. These are technologies that were invented for the video game world and are popularized in the video game world, but the implications are way beyond gaming. In fact, I think that augmented reality is probably going to stand as one of the greatest contributions that video games will have made to the world, and not about gaming, right? Because augmented reality, we're only beginning to see how much augmented reality is really going to change and improve people's lives on literally a day-to-day basis.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
Another thing video games did was put computers in the home. Because if you go back to the late 70s and early 80s, it was the time where IBM PCs were just coming out and they were trying to put them out. And, by when I got to Atari, IBM was reporting about 10,000 PCs in homes, right? There were more in businesses, but in homes, there just weren't that many. People just did, what do I need a computer for? I don't have that many recipes. It's not that difficult a thing to track.
Now you have to have a computer.
And writing a letter, by the time you turn the computer on, you wait for everything going, you type it all up, you have to print it out, then you have to print the envelope and get that formatting and all that stuff. It's like, I might as well have just sat down and wrote it myself. It's faster that way, right? So it was hard to tell people, what do you need a computer for at home? People didn't get it. What video games, at a time when IBM had put 10,000 computers in people's homes, Atari had put about 4 or 5 million computers in people's homes. And video games were the killer app for getting computers in the homes. And I don't think a lot of people realized that was going on, but that's what was going on. And this video games is what really put computers in homes. And that was a huge thing to do. Of course, when you say, resulted in social media and stuff, I don't know if it was any great favor. But there's a lot of interesting things that go on. Now, there's some downsides too. It's created some real tricky issues for parenting, right? What do you do with video games? Parents are worried that kids are so involved with their video games and they're getting the violent impulses. There's the violence thing. There's the out of touch thing. There's the parents don't know what the kids are doing thing. There's a lot of things that are complicated as a parent because of video games. And what I tell parents is, the thing if you tell your kids you can't, if you try to restrict them, say no video games for you, right? That's not a very effective strategy, because what the kids will do is they'll go play with their friends. They're not going to stop playing video games. They're not going to disconnect themselves from their entire social network, right? So what you do as a parent is you play with your kids. If you're worried about the kids getting the wrong idea about video games, then you sit down and play games with your kids and explain to them, well, this is kind of fun and this is real, and this stuff over here, this is total crap. This is unbelievable. Nothing is really like this, but it's fun. You can do it, but you can help normalize it But the key is having communication, right? Parents today think because kids are so digitized and so into their devices that parents have no influence. And the truth is, parents have more influence than anybody else, but you have to use your influence. And the only way you can really use or wield influence is with communication. So if you're not there in place in the trenches with your kids so that you can talk with credibility with them about something, as long as if you're not in there, then you can't communicate with the kids. If you're going to tell your kids what not to do so they need to hide from you, you're telling your kids to lie to you. You're telling your kids to hide from you. And that's not the way to communicate. You've got to open the lines, and it's more challenging now because it is more work. And also, a lot of parents are very busy themselves. We also have parents today who grew up with video games, which when I was making video games did not exist. Right? When I was making video games, no one grew up with video games. We were inventing video games.
Right.
It was a new thing.
Excellent.
Now you have generations. There's like 2 generations now that have grown up knowing what a video game is and playing it all the time. That's a very different experience.
It is.
So, good.
I was just going to say, I didn't even realize it's not mentioned in the book, but it is in the Atari Game Over. I didn't know that Atari made Pong. We got that for Christmas, whatever year it came out. I'm sure I was young. It was the big thing of that Christmas, and it was the shit,
Absolutely.
Enjoying the hell out of Pong. And I didn't realize that was basically the first iteration of Pong or of Atari. But you're right. The 2600, that was the first computers in the home. After that, I got the TRS-80, which was just a keyboard that plugged into the TV.
Yeah, the trash 80.
Yeah, exactly.
We used to call it.
Hey, but it taught me basic.
That was a great system. It was great system. I still remember a 2-line program that you could do art with, right? They had a thing called the pipe function, right? Where it would just draw a pipe from one place to another place. You'd give it 2 sets. So I used to write this 2-line basic program on any TRS-80 like in the stores, and it would use this pipe function, and I would just use the random function. You'd say draw a pipe from random location to random location, and then the next line is go to the first line, and it's just created this infinite loop that would just keep drawing these pipes, and it was cool. It was a cool thing to watch. I'd go in, it'd take a couple seconds to type in. That was a fun system. You could play with that system.
Now, I hate to go back, but there was something that I've been dying to ask you. So we had talked about coin-op arcades and stuff like that, but I wanted to see what your opinion was, or if you've even heard of these arcade bars that are popping up. One that I've personally went to in Austin, Texas, is Cidercade, and it's a bar where you can get ciders, pizza, like brick oven pizza, and it's filled with all of the classic arcade games that you can play. And that's it. It's not big gaming or board games. It's arcades. And I thought it was really amazing. But for someone who didn't grow up doing a lot of the coin-operated arcades and stuff, I wanted to ask you, what do you think about that?
I think it's cool. I mean, there was Nolan Bush now, after Atari, he went and started Chuck E. Cheese Pizza. Right. And then
he was.
Yep, that was him. And then he launched this thing that was like these e-cafes where you'd be at a desk or you'd be at your table and you could order something off a tablet and they would just bring the stuff to you. It was like an earlier version of the way a lot of restaurants work now. He was a real visionary. But those cafes didn't really make it. But what they didn't really have there was the idea that you could be playing the games and stuff. Like if you think about it, that's already this concept has been existed in Las Vegas casinos for a long time, right? Because they have the slot machines that are built into the bar right in front of you, so you can play your slots and you can get a drink. You can probably get appetizers and stuff also, right? It's all there. So what they did was they just sort of took that out of a casino and put it into a regular thing. I think they're fabulous. It's a fun thing to do. You can go, you can play some arcade games with some friends. You can order stuff. You can get what you want. It's a good social medium, right? Which we need more of, I think.
Definitely. So I love going in there and getting friends and talking to them about do you want to play this game as well? You talk a lot more. And for someone who didn't grow up with it, I really like to see, everybody's always talked about this stuff, especially, when we did a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle episode, The Last Ronin, and we talked about a lot of the original stuff. Getting to go there and play those games was awesome, and talk to people rather than people just like doing this or anything. Like, it was a real sociable place, and it was the first time as an adult that I felt like a child, but an adult at the same time.
Right. And that's the thing, right? So, because you playing the games always takes you back to your childhood, but being able to order drinks definitely takes you more to your adulthood. And when you put them together, you can really have a multifaceted personality experience.
It was cheap too. I think it was a special deal. It was $5 as long as you wanted, but I think it was normally only $15 to get in and play whatever you wanted. And I was like, this is great.
It is great. I think that's cool.
And I am back. My battery was already done. Like I said, I'm on this new laptop, and I thought it would actually make it through a show because my old one wouldn't. But I want to touch on something here. You were talking about technology and augmented reality and virtual reality, and we touched on this in the last show, where you had talked about that Atari had the hologram technology and what your idea was. I seriously think you need to run with the whole shower with a celeb thing. I think that's $1 billion idea, especially with how far technology has come. I know, especially if you went the whole porn angle, you could make trillions probably. But
no, when you combine that idea with force feedback controllers, I think you really got something. Oh my God. Mind blown.
All right. Nobody can take that. Howard patented it right here. He trademarked it. But, going back to the book, and again, folks, this is called Once Upon Atari. How I made history by killing an industry. And Howard Scott Warshaw is responsible for Yara's Revenge, Raiders of the Lost Ark, E.T., and then what was the other one that took 20 years? Saboteur. And, like I said, I have thoroughly enjoyed the book. I want to see the documentary y'all did as well. I want to get the DVD copy of that. I want to watch it because I did watch Atari Game Over. One of the things we would be remiss now, I've stayed away from this for quite some time because I know that you get asked every single interview you've ever done. You get asked about ET, and I didn't, that's in the book. It's in a ton of other interviews, but give the 3-minute version of ET. We don't have to rehash everything, but just tell people what it is.
Well, E.T. was a really good window into the kind of thinking and circumstances that led to the entire crash of the video game industry. So I don't believe E.T. was actually responsible for crashing the industry. That's absurd. But think about this, is that the most expensive and highest valued license ever in the early video game industry was given the shortest development time to deliver by a factor of 5. Okay. So why would you do that? Why would you spend so much money on a license because you feel that's so important, and then cut the legs out from underneath your developers, in terms of doing it? That's really the story of E.T., right? The story of E.T. is a story of, it's the story of B-mobs, B-M-O-B-S, okay? Because there's a number of things that I introduced, because a lot of people don't know this about me. I'm an engineer for sure, and I'm a psychotherapist now, but I have a degree in economics as well. I was a business major before I went into technology. And so I used to pay a lot of attention to what was going on business-wise. And one of the things I noticed at Atari, because Atari was an amazing place to go to business school, because you really got to learn a lot of insider stuff. And B-mobs stands for Believe My Own Bullshit Syndrome. Okay, that's what B-mobs is. That's an acronym that I made up for the book. And B-mobs is something you may recognize in the people you work with today, because whenever you have some real success at a company, there's an old saying that says success has 1,000 parents, but failure is an orphan, right?
Yep.
When there's success in an environment, everybody lines up to take credit for it. And everybody was taking credit for the success at Atari, which is great. The success was happening. There were a lot of very talented people doing a lot of hard work and a lot of interesting stuff. But no one really knew exactly how this was working. And a lot of us were blind to what the real issues and problems were. So when it turned around, things fell apart so quick and no one knew how to fix it. That's where B-Mobs really comes in. But the thing is, what the story of ET is the story of a management who really believed as long as they buy a name, it doesn't matter what comes out of engineering, we'll just let it go. And they had no idea what went on in engineering. So when they heard that, games take 6, 7, 8 months, well, so what? We have 5 weeks. We'll be able to put something out, right? And they went to engineering and they went to my boss's boss and said, hey, we need ET. We got 5 weeks. And my boss's boss said, no, you can't do a game that fast. Forget it. You just can't do it, because he wasn't out of his mind. He was still like in touch with reality. So, but one thing we know about entrepreneurs is when they run into reality, they just keep looking till they find someone who stands outside of reality. And that's when I entered the picture. So Ray Kazar, for some reason, after talking to the head of engineering and having him say, no, you can't do it, he still thought for some reason it was worth talking to me, because I had talked to Ray before. We'd had some very interesting conversations before.
Yep.
So, and those are definitely covered in the book. But and at this point, he calls me up directly. He says, so Howard, can you do this game in 5 weeks? And I said, absolutely I can, provided we reach the right agreement. So it became a negotiation in addition to an incredible challenge. And it was a mountain for me to climb. I wanted a major challenge, and this was an irresistible challenge. So I was one of the people who was willing to totally ignore reality, try and push something through and make it happen. And at least for my own part, I really felt I was able to deliver something. So this was about my struggle to actually make an impossible wish come true, and how close I came to it. And it's, the whole book, as well as ET, it's a story of hubris and ridiculous oversight and people totally out of range and out of touch with reality, and people really crashing because of this. And then resiliency and coming back from it, and then seeing what it means in retrospect and being able to appreciate that. And it's just, my life has been an incredible roller coaster. Atari was just, a couple of humps on a major. There were some great humps at Atari, take my word for it. I mean, that was just a few of the loops on what's been a pretty amazing ride. Because I'm just a very non-standard guy. I just do things in an odd way. And so my life has been lived that way. And so it's made an interesting story.
It definitely has. And I just want to kind of stress this for the audience. Folks, if you look back over Geek Speak, over the couple of years that Meredith and I did it, we have had a lot of authors on this show. Not once did I read one of their books before the interview. Not only did I start Howard's, I finished it. And the whole reason is I enjoyed it. It wasn't because you were coming on the show. It was because, I could have found enough questions to fill up this much time without ever touching the book, just by going and doing a little research. But I thoroughly enjoyed the book. And I think you folks will as well out there. Again, it's called Once Upon Atari, How I Made History by Killing an Industry. He's doing an Audible version right now. He hopes it'll be out, by Christmas, or that's the goal. Mm-hmm. And but if not, you can pick it up on Kindle. That's where I got mine. You can also pick up your hard copy, or you can go to onceUponAtari.com and get a copy of it. And you get so many little tidbits, man. Like I told you the first time that you came a couple of weeks ago, I'm reading it on my tablet, and I figured out that I spent too much time on social media because I was sitting there tapping, trying to hit like on, a lot of different areas, just because there was so much. And that's the first half of the book. Was a lot of really cool stuff in the second half. Again, I don't want to give too much away, but we described you making ET. Give the legend of what happened with ET, and because that's a big part of the book too. It's interwoven in there. Don't give it away, of course, but tell the legend of ET.
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Matthew. I really appreciate your words, what you're saying. That really means a lot to me that you really enjoyed the book. And, and the book is about a lot more than just, the ET game and stuff. It's a lot about corporate culture, particularly in high-tech corporations. And there's lessons that I learned at Atari that I share that help people today, because unfortunately, a lot of the politics and a lot of the shenanigans and a lot of the infighting that goes on in companies is no different now than it was back then. Exactly. It's just that the vernacular has changed a little, but the games haven't. But the legend was that E.T. was such a horrible, horrible game. It was such a black mark on the face of the industry that they ended up having to hide it, to bury it. It was like their shame. And so there was this urban legend that not only was it worthless, but they had to drive hundreds of miles out into the desert and trash these games and drive over them and bulldoze them and then pour concrete over them and then bury it forever. It was like nuclear waste doesn't get this much attention. And so that was it. The game was so horrible and such a shame, and they were so off-put by it that this is what they had to do. They had to gather up millions of cartridges and truck them out into the desert, way into the desert, which, I never quite understood, because if something is so worthless, do you really have to hide it? Who's going to want to steal it, right? But this is this was the story. The story was that was it. They trucked it out into the desert and smashed it and concreted it and just buried the crap out of it. And then when it had fallen under about 30 years worth of layers and layers of garbage in the dump, that was when someone got the idea of, this urban legend has lasted for a long time. Let's go see what the deal is. And then an actual Hollywood movie company and some literally Oscar-winning producers decided to take a look and see what it was. And Microsoft funded a movie called Atari, and that's Atari Game Over. Atari Game Over is the story of the search for the ET cartridges to see, is it really true? Is it true that they were all buried? And as with many stories, there is some truth, but it's not the whole truth. And by the end of the movie, they actually have uncovered the entire truth. And It's a very interesting story. And as Matthew was alluding to it earlier, at one point in it, and I'm actually there at the dig in Alamogordo, New Mexico, and it was an overwhelming moment. I became very emotional. And honestly, to this day, when I watch Atari Game Over, which I still do occasionally, I still tear up. I get choked up. When I start crying in the movie, I'm actually choked up at home because it does take me back to an amazing and wonderful moment. And that's what this is about. It's about moments. That's what entertainment's about, right? It's about, can you create a moment, a special time that will live with you positively forever. That's what a great entertainment moment is. And I was blessed with the opportunity to provide that for many people. And along the way, I got some myself, and it's very meaningful to me to have done that. And I tried to communicate that in the Once Upon Atari book. I really wanted to tell the story. Because I'll tell you this, one of the places the book came from was Zach Penn, the guy who was the director and also the star of Atari Game Over. I was talking with him because he had seen my Once Upon Atari DVDs, which I had produced years ago. And that's all about everybody else who worked in VCS.
That's why I want to see it.
And that's a good show, and I'm proud to have produced that show. But he watched that, and it was very good research for him. But he said, he goes, what's really missing from this? I'm like, what's that? He goes, you. He goes, you're a big part of this story, and you're hardly in it. I'm the host of Once Upon Atari, the DVD, but I don't really tell a lot about myself and my experiences.
Gotcha.
So that's why I wrote the book, because there was a big hole missing, and he was absolutely right. And that's when I put that together. So between the book and the DVD, you get the whole picture of everything that's going on from at least 25 different perspectives.
And like you said, guys, and we've said at the beginning, you really need to pick up this book, or if you're more of an audio person, it'll be coming out around December, which is going to make a great Christmas. All of the stuff, you can listen to the first one and you can listen to this one. It doesn't do it justice. There's a lot more to learn. And like Matthew said, you're going to be laughing at it. You're going to really enjoy it.
Yep.
I mean, I hate to sound like a broken record like Matthew. Y'all haven't seen me before. Matthew's alluded before, like, I just don't really read books. But this is one that I have read, and I'm working on finishing. I'm more than halfway through it. Once again, like Matthew, it's time. We got other things, but
life.
If I say that it's worth it, go get it, guys.
And, you know, you mentioned Zach a while ago, so I just have to say one of the things that stuck out to me in the book was, thanks for the microbes, Zach. And, and folks, if you want to know what that is referring to, pick up the book. There are a lot of these kind of things. And like I said, you know, we talk a lot about the time at Atari and the corporate atmosphere. And, you know, you don't really get a lot into your personal life, but you talk a little bit about the life with Atari outside of Atari. But you know, you kind of embrace the ET thing. Another quote I loved was, "I'll never live it down, so I might as well live it up." I loved that.
And lemonade, bitches. That's another good one.
But another big thing that resonated with me was your friendship with Jerome, and how you said that you guys would sit and talk for hours about movies. That's David and I. That's what spawned this show. Was he and I would talk once or twice a week, and we would go over what movies we had seen, and we'd pick them apart. And then he was down here for a visit. He used to live here. He moved away not too long ago, but he was here with his girlfriend. And one of his buddies came over, and my wife was sitting here, and him and I are just talking, going back and forth about whatever the latest movie was. And I had been on hiatus from the Geek Speak. Like I told you, my former co-host died. And my wife and his buddies turned to us and they said, "This is the podcast y'all should do." This right here. And so, like I said, folks, there is a lot of Howard in this book. You get to see so much more than just the Atari side of things. And that is a huge draw for me in the first place, the Atari side of things. What kept me there was you, your voice, your experiences, your unique life perspective.
He paints a picture.
You do. And there is a couple other things I want to say, because we need to wrap it up here. We're after the top of the hour, and I want to talk to you off the air for a second before you got to get out of here. But you gave a description of your tombstone inscription. You gave one that it originally was, and then one you changed it to. And man, I fucking love it. Share it with the audience if you don't mind.
Well, it's true. What a long time ago, a realtor actually asked me, what do I want written on my tombstone? And what I ultimately came up with was, Howard was an artist. His medium was life.
I love it.
I never wanted to be restricted or feel like I always believe if you want to go somewhere, you can go there if you just construct a path. And most things are more accessible than we tend to believe they are. That's the message I give to my clients, and I try to help people get where they're trying to go, figure out where they might want to go, and define a path to it. And I've always believed that if you're not happy where you are, if you're unsatisfied with where you are, there's a better place for you. And you just have to figure out how to get there. And I didn't even know where that was. I just always believed in it. When I got to Atari, that was the first time I really had proof that there it is, that it's possible. But I came up with that before I ever went to Atari. And then Atari gave me the chance to really practice my life as an art. And it both was a blessing and a curse, because after Atari, it took me another 25 years to find anything remotely as satisfying or as gratifying as the work that I was doing at Atari. And all those years, what sustained me, what kept me going, was the belief that I know I can do it because I've done it once. I got to be able to do it again. I just have to find the way. And it took me a long time to get there. It took me a lot of trying to get out of my own way. And and these are some of the lessons that I try to convey in the book, frankly, because I just want to pass on some of the observations that I've made in life, both about, dealing with other people, dealing with yourself. What is life about? The big questions. I'm a big answers kind of guy.
And I do think you get that across really well, Howard. You pepper it enough throughout the book. You balance it out. The book is really balanced between the Atari story and your experiences. And like I said, I really enjoyed it. And in fact, I highly expect that when you come out with the audio version, I will probably end up listening to it. I like books on tape. I like listening to them when I'm driving. I just found out today Joe Kenda came out with another book, and I love the way he narrates his books. So I picked that up for a road trip. But there was one other thing regarding books, and this is one, you use it, and it cracked me up because you had it in your head for a while. Tell the ending of your book that you always had in your mind, as the sun sets.
Oh, right. No, there was, I always had this, because two things I'm good at is coming up with titles and coming up with last lines. It's the stuff in between that takes a lot of time to come up with.
Right.
But I always wanted to end a book with the line, and as the sun slowly sinks into the east, we notice the earth is rotating in the wrong direction. And I just thought that's got to be a sensational ending, to a story. I just need the story that leads up to it is all.
Right. I'm the same way on a lot of the stories. I can get that opening line and then I know how it ends, but it's the whole stuff in between. But Howard, we have certainly enjoyed the beginning, the middle, and the end of our time with you. Folks, again, it's Once Upon Atari, How I Made History by Killing an Industry. You've got to pick it up. Both David and I highly recommend this book. If you didn't catch the first part of this show, it was 2 weeks ago. It's episode 12. I've got it marked in the description. You'll want to skip ahead for an hour there. Howard had some stuff going on. You'll notice I'm in the dark. You just see a big head floating in the air because my power was out. But make sure that you check that stuff out. You can go to onceuponatari.com to pick up the book. Keep your ear to the grindstone or to the ground to hear more about the Yar's Revenge sequel that's coming down the road. Howard, before we close it out, is there anything else you want to say or where people can follow you?
Let me just say that getting two geeks up on this book is awesome. I'm loving that. And I'm going to be at Portland Retro Gaming Expo in mid-October. If anybody wants to come out there, I'll be autographing stuff and seeing people there. And in mid-November, I'll be at Free Play, Florida, as soon as they get the floor mopped up. I think should be good by then, I hope. And that's Orlando in November. And I want to say thank you so much to the two of you for hosting me. I just really appreciate it. It was great talking with the two of you.
Thanks for coming back, man.
Yeah, we really
enjoyed being here.
We really enjoyed it, Howard. Don't go anywhere. I'm going to close out the show, and then we want to talk to you for just a second off the air.
I'm here.
All right, good deal. Folks, again, make sure you check out the show every Sunday night at 9 p.m. Central. And I guess she's going to tell you all that here in just a second anyway. So we'll see you next week at 9 p.m. or 7 p.m. Pacific.
Oh, that does it for this episode of Into the Geekverse. If you enjoy our content, please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel. And if you want to join us live, hit that bell so you never miss a show. Want to catch us on the go? Listen to our podcast on every major platform, but you can catch the real fun on YouTube. Be sure to visit geekinsider.com for tons of great geek content and advertising opportunities. And if you want to stay up to date on all things geeky, sign up for our newsletter. We'll see you next Sunday at 9 p.m. Central. And if you're not here, we might have to revoke your geek card. Have a great week, everyone.